A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Thank you so much for tuning in once again to another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam and Company. My name is Cam Edwards. It is good to be with you today. We have a very, very busy show. Lots of stuff to get to, including this shooting and standoff in Philadelphia last night. Rich Zeoli of WPHT in Philly is going to join us here in just a minute or two. Larry Keane, Vice President and General Counsel of the National Shooting Sports Foundation, is going to be with us as well as we talk about the industry's response to the attacks in El Paso, Texas, Dayton, Ohio, and more. Where does the industry want to see this discussion go? What is the industry doing already to try to stop suicides, to try to stop these active assailant attacks? And finally, Kurt Schlichter, town hall columnist, will join us as well. We'll talk about President Trump weighing in on gun control measures and why it would be a very, very bad idea to embrace a gun control agenda. Plus, we have our armed citizen story, we have our good deed of the day. We've got another failure of the existing criminal justice system to talk about. That's exactly the case in Philadelphia last night, where a guy well known to law enforcement, well known to the community as being a bad actor, opened fire, wounding 6 police officers before ultimately surrendering to authorities hours later. Again, we spoke with Rich Zeoli of WPHT in Philly about this entire situation, including the almost instantaneous calls for gun control proposals by politicians who should know better. Take a look and a listen. Rich, thanks so much for spending some time with us today. I know it is a very, very busy day for you and basically everybody in Philadelphia, media and law enforcement.
Hey, Cam, always a pleasure to be with you, man. It's been a crazy, crazy few hours, that's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, we all sort of watched this. It was like, an episode of Live PD on our cable television networks last night as this, 6-time convict, right, who police were trying to serve a warrant on this home where he was. It's still unclear, at least last I read, whether or not he was a specific target of this warrant, but he was certainly inside that home. Opened fire, 6 police officers injured. Thankfully, nobody died. Suspect taken into custody. I mean, this was a crazy event. And what was crazier than watching all of this unfold in Philadelphia, Rich, was watching the talking heads and politicians, as this is ongoing, start to call for things like, magazine bans. That's why we need gun bans. I saw politicians who were trying to fundraise for campaigns off of this unfolding tragedy. It was
shameful.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cam, look, I mean, this guy should never have been on the streets, and how he was on the streets is remarkable, and I'll explain that in a second, but this is a guy who did time in federal and state prison. He threatened to kill a woman. He was arrested for false imprisonment. I mean, this is a dangerous guy, and yet he still managed to have guns because he's a criminal, and as we know, they just somehow managed to get guns because they don't follow the law. And sure enough, the mayor of Philadelphia came out right away, Jim Kenney, Mr. Sanctuary City. We got to do more to get gun control right away. Gun control. The situation hadn't even resolved itself yet, and the district attorney Larry Krasner tweeting out the same thing. Mayor Kenney's 100% right. We need more gun control. The reason why this guy's on the street, Cam, is because our district attorney in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, this guy is a Marxist. He is. He's a Marxist. He's absolutely believing of the fact that if people commit crimes, it's because they come from poverty, and that this is all they're victims of that, victims of capitalism. Bullets equal poverty, and that's really the problem right there. And he wants to disarm everybody, and he doesn't prosecute gun crimes anymore. He doesn't, so you have to leave that up to the United States Attorney for the district, McSwain. But Larry Krasner, he just thinks that people are victims. So the problem for him is not them, not the criminal, but what we have done to them and what we've done to society to enable circumstances like this, of which they have to now, rise up, I guess.
Yeah, and I've read some stuff about Larry Krasner, and there have been other issues here. Individuals who are arrested for illegal possession of a firearm, they get sent to this deferred prosecution program that Krasner's put in place. They're put back onto the streets almost immediately, and then they get picked up for violent crimes days or weeks later, including murder, right? I mean, this is a serious issue in Philadelphia.
100%. And the violent crimes they get picked up for, too, in Philadelphia, they wind up getting turned away. In fact, I've spoken to the Philadelphia police about this because, as you know, big friends, a lot of friends in the police force. The problem right now is that they are having to catch guys on lower kind of crimes, but they know they're bad guys. They want to get them off the streets. I mean, this guy, for example, the shooter last night, he had been arrested at one point for riding a scooter without a permit. And that was done to get him off the streets because cops know he's dangerous. But what happens is that the district attorney just lets him go, no matter what really the charge is. And then you have residents who are afraid to cooperate with the police. They know who the bad guys are. They know the drug dealers on the corner, but they don't want to cooperate with police because if they do that, then the guy's going to be released on the streets and he's going to know somebody dropped a dime on him, Cam. So they're not going to do that either. It's making the job of the Philadelphia Police Department incredibly hard. There are cops who've told me they're afraid to make arrests because they know that they might get in trouble if something's not followed by the book, and the guy's going to probably be sent free anyway. And the mindset of, well, he's a criminal and he's dangerous and he had an illegal gun and he had drugs and he did all this stuff, but should still be on the streets because people need, 18 different chances? I don't really understand the mindset of it, but it's a mindset in this city right now, whether it's that or it's illegal aliens who are released from Philadelphia jails and just back on the streets because we don't cooperate with ICE in the city. The mindset of these Democrats is an extreme position of very much of the mindset of, look, the cops are the problem. The cops are not our friends. And, if we just get rid of guns, if we just somehow magically disarm law-abiding citizens and somehow that'll have, I guess, a trickle-down effect on the streets of Philadelphia where the crime is, I mean, that makes absolutely no sense to me.
Nothing about that makes sense, including, the cops are the problem. Hey, we need a whole bunch of more gun control laws on the books that the cops will have to enforce, even though the cops are the problem. I don't get that. But, you do bring up the issue, and I think it is inflamed by some of these politicians viewing police officers as the enemy. I saw a video from Philadelphia, from the scene last night. Again, as everything is unfolding, you've got officers who are being harassed, who are being taunted, having stuff thrown at them, as they're trying to bring this individual into custody or at that point, try to stop the threat to the lives of Philadelphians.
Exactly right, Cam. And I played it on the show today, the people harassing the cops and spitting on them. And it's disrespectful. It's shameful, but that's what's tolerated now. It's what's tolerated, and it's why morale is down so low on the force, because that kind of stuff is acceptable. And they don't look at the police as coming to protect their streets. And I should also point out, too, Philadelphia is a very diverse city. We have a very diverse police force. And there are also black cops who are getting spit on, too. It's not, the narrative of just white cops coming into a black neighborhood. That is not the truth. And they're trying to take a very community police-oriented approach to policing. You have a lot of people that don't want the cops there. And when they're greeted like that, there's no repercussions because they're expressing what the district attorney is essentially saying, that the cops have been the problem, abusing your civil liberties and being racist to you and putting you away for petty crimes when they should have just left you alone. And the city is talking about doing safe injection sites now for heroin. And I don't know how that works because I don't know if you are arrested with heroin and you just say you're on your way to a safe injection site. I don't know if that means that you get off. I don't know if they will allow you to sell it within a certain range of the safe injection site. I have no idea. But some of these neighborhoods in Philadelphia, which are so crime and drug ridden, where they want to do this stuff, the people that live there, they want the police there. They want the police to be on the streets. They want to have a good relationship with the cops. And the cops can't do their job if the residents are afraid to talk to them. And the only reason why residents would talk to the police is if they believe they're going to get a bad guy off the streets. And I think a lot of people last night, you see the video of people yelling at the police. What you don't see are a lot of the residents who thank the cops, thank them for being there. There was one guy who did an interview with 6 ABC, and he was very, very upset, just said, I'm so glad the police are here to protect my kids and my family. This happened, Cam, right next to a daycare center. And parents were separated from their kids all day and into most of the night until they got a text message saying where they could go retrieve their children. So the people don't want to live in crime-ridden streets in Philadelphia, but the mindset of the district attorney, Larry Krasner, and I think Jim Kenney, the mayor, to a degree, even though he didn't used to be like this, but he is now, he's woke now. The mindset of them is that unless you're an axe murderer or something like that, you really don't deserve to be behind bars. And we have to seek an understanding and build a bridge with you, even though you're a criminal. And that's the way to do it. And then at the same time, we'll have Harrisburg, the capital of Pennsylvania, and then Congress pass draconian gun laws, which will take guns away from guys like me and you, Cam, even though we haven't done anything wrong.
Yeah, you're right. And it's such a dysfunctional system. And the sad thing is, Rich, and you know this, you've just talked about this, it doesn't have to be this way. there are plenty of people, good people in these bad neighborhoods who want to be able to work with the police. They want to be able to say, listen, yeah, you know this guy's a bad guy. I know this guy's a bad guy. And I'm willing to go to court to say this guy was a bad guy and here's what he did. But they're only going to do that, as you say, if they know that this person's going to get put away. And they see the failures of the criminal justice system day in and day out. And so why should they risk their neck to go to court to testify against somebody when the odds are, you know, just a few months down the road, maybe a year down the road, he's going to be out. And in the meantime, his buddies are still going to be out on the street, ready to enact revenge. We can stop this vicious cycle, but you're right. We need the district attorney involved. You need the mayor involved. You got to understand that the police are the good guys, whatever flaws might need to be fixed within the department. And you got to understand that there are more good people than bad people in these high crime neighborhoods. And you've got to work for them, not for the people who are creating havoc and terror on the streets of Philadelphia.
Yeah, well said. Exactly right. And this guy, the shooter last night, was on probation. What I don't understand is that when you're on probation, federal probation, but then you're arrested in, I think it was October of 2014, for threatening to kill a woman and for false imprisonment, how that doesn't get you back behind bars for the rest of your life. That's what I don't understand. You know, all the talk that we hear from Democrats, and it was shameful last night, right? Kamala Harris coming out in the middle of this and speculating. And that one representative who was a former police chief, apparently, who said, yeah, it's high-capacity magazines, their new talking point. I love all the talking points, right? Weapons of war, high-capacity magazine. They didn't even have any of the details out when they're speculating with all their talking points last night. It was pathetic. But what they never come out, Cam, they never come out and say, if you use an illegal gun twice, you'll go away for the rest of your life if you use an illegal gun in a crime. This guy had used an illegal gun multiple times. He'd been arrested for having illegal guns and illegal gun possession on multiple occasions. You notice there's never any tough sentencing for a guy like that over the fact that he keeps using illegal guns. His gun last night was illegal, obviously. But instead of focusing on that and saying, what if we do some sort of a, 3 strikes law, use a gun illegally 3 times to go to prison, Democrats will never offer that up. Instead, what you get is like what Kirsten Gillibrand proposed yesterday, a mandatory buyback program. Cam, if somebody makes me sell something to you, that's not a buyback. That's called confiscation. If I've got to give that up and you give me a rebate check, that you've just confiscated my guns. That's what they're talking about right now. And I tell you what, this guy on the streets of Philadelphia last night, he's not cooperating with a mandatory buyback program. No. He's not doing it.
No. I mean, listen, we might as well have a mandatory drug turn-in program. Right? I mean, that's the other aspect of this that just drives me crazy. You're right. Val Demings, former police chief in Orlando, Florida, out there talking about, well, we need a magazine ban.
Yeah.
How's that going to work any more effectively than the bans on opioids that we have in Philadelphia and across the nation right now? Because as bad as violent crime is in Philadelphia, the drug overdose death rate is almost double the homicide rate. Same in Baltimore and Maryland. So, banning stuff doesn't work. We can't ban our way to safety. And you'd think that a former law enforcement official like Val Demings would know that of all people. And unfortunately, instead, we see these tired, stale talking points instead of actually working to get to the root of the problem.
Exactly right. 100%. It's stale talking points that they know their solutions aren't going to work. The high capacity magazine one is another one that really burns me from the sense of they act as if the bullets now. So they first the gun, now the bullets. They're still not focusing on the shooter. It's never about the individual with them. It's always about the object or now objects. And these magazine limits, I was joking on the show today. Some guy from a gang, if he's going to pop a cap in you, he's not going to stop at 10 just because 10 is the limit of the number of bullets he can have. They don't follow the law. It's against the law to shoot at cops. This guy did it anyway last night. It's against the law to not surrender. He did it anyway last night.
So even as politicians were trying to use this situation in Philadelphia last night to demand more gun control laws, they're still out there talking about the need for more gun laws to try to cut down on these active assailant attacks like what we've seen in El Paso, Texas, Dayton, Ohio. Larry Keane from the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the firearms industry trade group, spoke with me earlier today about what the industry believes the right response should be and the most effective response should be in terms of stopping these types of attacks. You're ready to start talking here about things that can really make a difference in terms of reducing violent crime. And it sounds like that involves existing initiatives that NSSF has had going on for quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, the industry did issue a statement. We did not speak publicly the week before out of respect for the victims, their families, and allow those communities an opportunity to mourn their loss, to pray, and to begin the healing process. We didn't think it was appropriate to engage in, heated political debates. But now some time has passed, and of course the other side wasted no time in raising money in support of their political agenda. So the National Shooting Sports Foundation, is the Firearms Industry Trade Association, has a long history of supporting real solutions to make for safer communities. Some programs we've been doing now for literally 20 years, like Project Child Safe, where we distribute free firearm safety education kits all throughout the United States, partnering with 15,000 law enforcement agencies. Cam, we've given out over 38 million firearms safety education kits that include a free gun lock. We've been doing the Don't Lie for the Other Guy program in partnership with ATF to help them to prevent illegal straw purchases that can sometimes occur, and to get the word out in the communities that it's a serious crime to illegally straw purchase a firearm, and you can get 20 years in jail and a $250,000 fine. And we're doing some other more recent programs, like, importantly, the Fix NICS campaign, which we started after Newtown, where we have changed the law in 16 states, increased the disqualifying mental health records that are in the background check system by 220%. And of course, Senator Cornyn's Fix NICS Act was named after and builds upon our initiative to make sure that all federal agencies put the records into the system. We saw in Sutherland Springs what happens when, for example, the Air Force didn't put disqualifying records in. That individual is able to purchase firearms, and he should not have been able to do that. And also to help incentivize the states to get those records put into the system. So we're very proud of that. We're working with the largest suicide prevention organization in the country, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, to try to give retailers, rangers, and gun owners information and resources to try to help identify individuals who might be suicidal. 2/3 of all gun deaths are suicides. Half of all suicides involve a firearm. So it's an area where we can hope to have an impact to reduce those unfortunate tragedies. And we're working with ATF on what we call Operation Secure Store, because ATF has identified that gangs are doing smash and grab burglaries of gun stores and stealing a lot of guns. And of course, nothing good happens when those guns hit the street. So we're working with ATF, things like matching ATF reward offers to try to apprehend the individuals responsible and recover the guns as quick as possible before they get into the wrong hands. And also to help dealers with education and information about how they can secure their inventory better to make themselves less likely to be a victim, or to make it more difficult for criminals to steal guns when they do commit burglaries by, driving trucks through the front door, ripping the bars off the gates, and off the front door and the windows and such. So the industry is involved in pursuing real solutions to make our communities safer. But we're always willing to have a conversation with anybody who's willing to speak in good faith and respect that there are differing views, and try to find common ground that can improve the situation. And I think the Fix NICS Act is really a great example of that. That bill passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. I mean, Senator Cornyn was the sponsor, and Cam, the lead Democrat co-sponsor, was Chris Murphy, hardly a friend of the firearms industry. But we were able to support that bill because it was good policy and will improve the background check system. And I think we need more of that. As we've seen, these individuals in El Paso and Dayton were able to pass background checks. We think the focus should be on improving the system and make sure that it works the way it's supposed to give NICS the resources they need to do this, and make sure the states get the records in. We're continuing our efforts on the Fix NICS campaign at the state level in places like Wyoming, Montana, and New Hampshire, where the states need to do a better job putting the records in. There is common ground. Nobody wants to see these tragedies take place, but we think the focus should be on the individuals committing them. Make sure that people who shouldn't have guns never get guns of any kind at any time. And when you start focusing just on the product that's misused instead of the individual, you're really missing the point. I mean, we need to, make sure these individuals can't get their hands on firearms if they're prohibited. There needs to be, clearly, it seems to me, more mental health resources. In many parts of the country, as you know, there are no mental health resources for individuals in need. So we as a country need to do a better job providing mental health resources for individuals long before they ever get to the point where people talk about having these extreme risk protective orders, many of which, in our opinion, don't respect the Second Amendment, don't provide real and adequate due process. You can take somebody's firearms away from them and they don't get a hearing for 2 weeks. That's not due process. No one would be allowed to languish in jail for 2 weeks without being arraigned and being advised of the charges against them and having counsel assigned. So we think, these laws, are not respecting the Second Amendment, not providing adequate due process. And Cam, if we're at the point where somebody is so dangerous, you need to take their rights away and seize their lawfully owned firearms. Why is that person on the street? I mean, what are you going to do about the knives? What are you going to do about their car or gasoline they have in their shed or fertilizer? And the list goes on. I mean, the focus should be on these individuals, getting them the help that they need, making sure they're not a danger to themselves or to the community. And so, we need to have resources to address that, not focusing on banning, the most popular rifle in America. That's, over 16 million of them have been sold just since 1990. They're more popular, more modern sporting rifles in America than there are Ford F-150s. And I'm sure if you went outside right now, within 10 minutes, you would see a Ford F-150 somewhere.
Yeah, I think that you're right. And I think that you're also absolutely spot on when you talk again about the gaps that the red flag laws don't address. In fact, one of the things that I've offered as a suggestion to the supporters of these red flag laws is just give us an example of where a red flag law would be a more appropriate response than using the existing civil commitment laws or the existing criminal justice system, because we haven't really seen that. And you're absolutely right. I think when we've gotten to the point where someone's a danger to themselves or others, it seems to me like either the criminal justice system is going to be able to step in or the mental health system should be able to step in. And if the mental health system in this country is not able to step in, then you're right. That's the issue here, right? And we need to address that. And it goes far beyond these individuals who might engage in active assailant attacks. I think we are dealing with, in many cases, a mental health crisis. Suicide is up over the last few years. And that includes gun-related homicides, gun-related suicides, but non-gun-related suicides are increasing even faster.
Right. Suicide rates are up, and there's a lot of complicated reasons behind that. But again, the industry is trying to do something about it. We're working with the largest suicide prevention organization in the country to help them reach their goal of trying to reduce suicides by 20% by 2025. And that's a big challenge. So we're trying to help retailers and ranges and gun owners, to have that brave conversation with somebody that may be in duress. People don't walk in to a range or a retailer with a sign, that says, I'm thinking about committing suicide, obviously. And of course, if somebody is obviously distraught and, is crying and emotional, as a retailer, you obviously wouldn't sell them a gun. You wouldn't, if you're a range, a gun. But oftentimes there's no indication, obvious outward manifestation of what they're thinking, of course. So, but we're trying to make sure people understand it's important to have that brave conversation. And on red flag laws, and I don't like the term red. I mean, I think it's better to describe them as extreme risk protective orders on extreme risk. And as you say, if you're at that point, why hasn't something already been done? And Florida, in Parkland, Florida had an extreme risk protective order. Now they modified it, but it existed. And how many times did the police visit that individual? What did the school know? I mean, they wouldn't let him on their grounds because they thought he was dangerous. And Connecticut had one as well prior to Newtown. And that didn't stop that individual in Sandy Hook, unfortunately. So, when we're looking at some language that's being proffered by Senator Graham and Senator Blumenthal, we have concerns. We're communicating that back to those offices. But what we've seen is an improvement over past legislation, but it still does not provide adequate due process, in our opinion.
Let me ask you about something else as well, Larry, because you talked about ensuring that people who are not legally allowed to possess a gun should not be able to get one. Gun control advocates would say, listen, this is why we need universal background checks. And the same background check that you go through when you buy a firearm at retail, you should have to go through that same background check if you're buying a firearm, from an individual who's not a gun dealer, but maybe it's your neighbor, maybe it's your cousin. There should still be some sort of NICS check before that transfer takes place. Does the NSSF have a position on that?
We think you have to. That's really the purpose of the Fix NICS campaign. Before you even have a conversation about it, this massive expansion of background checks, it's a false sense of security because we know the background check system is not working the way it's supposed to, the way the public was promised it would work. There are massive amounts of information that's not being put into the background check system. And, the retailers rely upon the background check system to be sure that they are not transferring a firearm to a prohibited person. So when you're a store in Texas and this individual from Sutherland Springs walks in and passes a background check that he should not have, that individual was a prohibited person about 4 different ways, and none of that information was in the background check system. So if you have, so-called universal background checks, you're just going to have more bad background checks that aren't reliable, and we need to fix the system before you can even begin to have that conversation, in our opinion. And there are lots of issues from the industry side with these proposals that are problematic for retailers. That you can lose your license, you can be sued in a product liability case. You wouldn't have insurance in that case because you didn't sell the gun from your inventory. If you make a mistake in the paperwork, you could lose your license. And some states have limited how much the retailer can charge. It's a money-losing proposition for the retailer.
Well, we actually saw in New Mexico, when their universal background check law went into effect on July the 1st, Walmart announced that it was simply going to stop selling firearms in the state because they were required to conduct these private transfers. And they said, our associates aren't really trained to handle people who might be walking through Walmart with a gun, going up to the gun counter and having them conduct a background check. So as a result, the largest firearms retailer in the state of New Mexico is now not selling firearms at all.
In other states like California, the retailers must perform these background checks. So you have lines out the door on a Saturday morning, and the store has to staff somebody to do this paperwork, and they're it's a money losing proposition. They have risk exposure from lawsuits or okay. What do you do if you're the retailer and one person comes in and wants to transfer the gun to another person? You take the gun, you have to log it into your records, you have to conduct the background check. What happens if that person is denied? Now you have to give it back to the purported seller. Well, guess what? You have to do a background check before you give it back to that person, right? And what if they somehow fail a background check? Now you have what's called a double denial. And what is the retailer supposed to do with the firearm now? It's not his. He can't sell it. He can't give it to either people. Can't give it back to the owner. What is he supposed to do? So it's not surprising to me that Walmart would say, we're not going to do this. It's too much. And why is a private business being required to conduct this government service, for individuals who are not their customers? It's not like, it's selling something from their inventory. These are two strangers to the retailer coming in, and he's now required to perform this government service. That just doesn't make any sense.
Absolutely. All right, let me ask you about one more issue here before we let you go. Obviously, it sounds like the NSSF is not supportive of any sort of ban on modern sporting rifles. One of the other things we heard about, in fact, yesterday, Val Demings, former chief of police in Orlando, Florida, now representative in Congress, as this shootout is taking place in Philadelphia, on cable television, Representative Deming says, we don't know this, but I suspect that these large capacity magazines are being used here, and we need to ban these magazines. What is the industry's position on banning magazines of any certain size? And I know the phrase high capacity magazine means basically magazine I want to ban, right? It could be 100 rounds, it could be 50 rounds, it could be 20 rounds, it could be 15 rounds, 10 rounds even. So what is the industry's position on calls for limiting magazine sizes?
Well, we've tried this experiment from 1994 to 2004. The federal government banned modern sporting rifles and restricted magazine capacity, not just for rifles, but for everything. And the Congress and studied the issue. The Department of Justice studied the issue, and the evidence is very clear. It had absolutely no impact on reducing violent crime in the United States. So we know it's not going to impact anything. You can change a magazine in a split second, and you get on the slippery slope. And we've already seen it in New York. We've seen it in Maryland, where they pick an arbitrary number, and then they lower that to another arbitrary number, and then they want to lower that even further. I believe many people that are the politicians that are pursuing these policies want to ban semi-automatic rifles or semi-automatic firearms entirely. And there's no rational basis. Why is 10 the right number and not 11 or 9? And we saw that in New York. I mean, even the court in New York said, there's no rational basis for this number 7. And the judge in California, the federal court judge, said that, the magazine capacity restriction is unconstitutional. And that case is obviously going to be litigated in the Ninth Circuit and may well find its way to the Supreme Court. So, but again, whatever the magazine capacity, that's determined by the government, you can change a magazine in a split second. And it's really, why is it under the Second Amendment, the government doesn't get to decide what amount of self-defense I'm allowed to have. In the same way the government under Heller, that choice is taken away from the government. It's not for the government to decide what firearms I'm allowed to have. I have the right to keep and bear arms so long as they're commonly owned. The government doesn't get to choose for me what firearms I get to have for self-defense.
Larry Keane with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. Again, willing to sit down and have a conversation with anybody who wants to have an honest discussion. Appreciate you sitting down with us today, sir. And I do hope some folks on the other side actually are willing to have a good faith conversation with you.
I think that's important. And that people need to dial down the overheated rhetoric. It's not constructive to try to find common ground. I mean, I respect other people's point of view, and they need to respect our point of view, and that we come to this in good faith. We are not, as former Vice President Biden said, that the gun industry is not the enemy. We hear a lot of really terrible things being said about the firearms industry, but not they don't want to talk about all the good things that the industry is doing that are real solutions for safer communities.
I also had the opportunity to spend some time recently with our friend Kurt Schlichter, columnist at townhall.com, talking about President Donald Trump and his push for some sort of gun reform laws. We've seen the president talk about quote-unquote red flag legislation, talk about improving background checks. What that actually means, we don't really know. And hopefully we're going to get some more specifics here soon. Kurt, who lives in California with a whole bunch of gun control laws on the books, joined us to talk about what a mistake it would be for the president to embrace a gun control agenda. Listen, I appreciate you coming on the program. You've written a piece at Town Hall not long ago talking about President Donald Trump and what he has said about background checks, about the need for red flag laws. And it's important to note, President Trump's not out there calling for a gun ban. He's not out there endorsing a full range of gun control proposals. But it also has to be noted that, a lot of the things that President Trump is talking about are very objectionable to gun owners, and I think for very good reason.
I'm not sure what he's talking about. The thing is, we'd all agree, I think, if there's some psychotic with a swastika on his forehead on YouTube saying, I'm going to take this 12 gauge and go down to a local synagogue and start firing. we're all like, okay, I think that's a guy we need to take action on. Nobody disagrees with that. What we do disagree with is, all right, ex-husband, now I'm going to you're a cop, now I'm going to fix you. Now I'm going to accuse you of being a psychopath, and they're going to take your guns, and you're going to have no due process, and it's just going to be a crazy thing. So I think we're all agreed on the concept, and it's not a revolutionary concept. You instill 5150, old Van Halen album, but it's also Health and Safety Code 5150 California. If you're nuts, they can put you away. So when you talk about red flag laws, are they red flag laws, or is this a better way with huge protections for constitutional rights, which no Republican seems to be against, to act? So I'm not sure what the president means, because he hasn't explained. When he talks about universal background checks, okay, well, we've seen background checks that let that psycho in Spring, Texas get a gun, let that guy who murdered those churchgoers in I think it was South Carolina get a gun when they shouldn't have, when they were criminals. And we all agree that we don't want felons packing heat. So when you say, what's a universal background check? Are you talking about if I want to give my adult kid a hand down a family rifle, do I have to go through a process? That's stupid. And I don't see any indication that that's what they're about. Making the government make weapons background checks effective, I don't see a problem with that. So I don't know what they're talking about. I just know that Donald Trump tends to be conciliatory towards his opponents, but doesn't end on a bad deal. And a bad deal on guns means he loses. And I think he knows that.
I think that you're right about that. And I think you're also right about the lack of specificity, which is a real part of the problem when it comes to quote unquote red flag legislation, because
yes,
whether it's President Trump or it's Representative Crenshaw or it's Senator Rubio, or even some of the Democrats that are talking about this, I don't believe that those who are proposing, let's say, a federal law that would, enable grants to states to set up red flag laws, I don't think that's coming from a place of let's take everybody's guns away. I think, as you say, the idea is let's find those most dangerous individuals at the most dangerous moment, and let's ensure that they don't have the means to carry out an attack. And I get that. But as you say, the devil's in the details. And
yes,
the 17 states that have adopted these red flag laws all look very different, right? And so what is it that we're actually talking about?
Well, and we haven't got there yet. I mean, the president has said generic line, I'm willing to look at improving background checks. I'm willing to look at, and even if you call them red flag laws, that's a red flag for us.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a way to use existing processes to take those guys who we all agree shouldn't be, who are about to do some and shouldn't be armed, to process them while protecting people's rights? We don't know yet. We haven't seen it debated. We haven't seen the proposals. So my feeling is we need to, while it is important to be absolutely suspicious, and we are the abused children of American politics, because there are a lot of people out there who will gladly sell us out if they can. We need to be suspicious, but we also need to, understand that people who are not in the gun world, when we say, well, red flag laws are terrible, well, we don't think they're terrible. We think some of them could be terrible. How are we explaining it to people who maybe aren't in the gun world, where we're not saying, hey, I want that guy, the guy with the a gun sight tattoo on his forehead, who's about to go shoot up a school, can't get grabbed? That's not what we're for. We're for that. How do we explain to people what we're for? And until we see some actual proposals and debate them, which is what a legislature is supposed to do.
Yeah.
Well,
you're right. But I will say this, though, like we have seen Rubio's proposal, which again would, give grant money to states that set up red flag laws.
Okay.
And there's a list of things that according to Rubio, the states would have to do. There's a checklist, right? That does contain some strong due process protection.
Good.
Doesn't contain everyone that I'd like to see. But again, this is something that can be debated.
Exactly. We have a starting point. And there's nothing that says Rubio, and look, nobody's got bigger doubts about Marco than me, but there's nothing that says Rubio won't go, hey, Cam, that's a great idea. That'll really protect people without undercutting what we're trying to do. Let's add that in. This is how it's supposed to work. See, we're so used to being handed a final decision for a yes or no on a plate that we've forgotten that the whole purpose of a deliberative body is deliberating.
Yes, and I do think that there have been folks who have just who've been very ineffective advocates for their position here. But one of the things that I keep going back to, you mentioned the 5150 law in California.
Yeah.
Every state in the union has a civil commitment law.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I have not heard from anybody who says, listen, we need one of these red flag laws, whatever it looks like in its final form. I want to hear somebody tell me where a red flag law would be more useful and a better idea than using either the civil commitment laws on the books or using the existing criminal justice system. You talk about somebody online who has the swastika and is talking about, I'm going to go shoot up a synagogue. Well, that's an actual threat, right? We don't need to red flag him. We can arrest him. And I have yet to hear the argument of, here's where the red flag law fits, where civil commitments wouldn't be appropriate and the criminal justice system wouldn't be appropriate. This is where the red flag law comes in. Give me that example. I'm willing to listen.
I agree with you. And I've wondered that myself. If this guy's nuts, why isn't he committed? If this guy is a criminal, why is he committed? Is there a space where someone hasn't quite committed a crime and isn't quite a lunatic who's just a bad person? Because I think we tend to call these murderers sick and crazy, and a lot of them just like hurting people. And is there a space between somebody you can convict beyond a reasonable doubt and somebody who meets the standards for actual commitment that we're missing? I don't know. I'd like to hear, and I'd like to hear people tell me what that is. I'd like to hear some people who have experience in that field that maybe I don't. That can tell me what we need to do. Look, again, this is what a republic's supposed to be about. We're supposed to debate these things and not get what we've had lately is everybody's, well, we've already agreed on a package. Here it is. Say yes.
Absolutely. And I want to get your thoughts on one other thing too, because I do think that, politicians, I think often look for not the easy answer. They're looking for an answer. And when their constituents are saying, you got to do something, you need to do something. And we're not bringing policy proposals to the table other than, well, shall not be infringed. Some nervous politicians might say, okay, I'm going to take that least bad gun control proposal and see if I can make that work.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think we need to do, I think we need to say what we've been saying, which is armed citizens are important. Law enforcement is important. Enforcing existing laws is very important. And the fact is, we are not in many cases enforcing existing laws. If you look at background checks, again, murderer after murderer has gotten past a background check. And the background check, even California background check I had last month was not particularly onerous. I walked in, I had the documents I needed, I showed them, I filled out the form. And I had to wait 10 days to get my my new weapon, but it can be done in such a way that that's annoying, but I've got some issues with it, but I can live with it. The simple fact is, though, everyone doesn't live like us, but everyone gets think like us, but everyone gets a vote, and we need to explain and be flexible enough for people who are not in our world to understand who we are and that we support things that will help. It is intolerable to have some scumbag walk in with a civilianized AK-47 and murder a bunch of innocent people. It is intolerable. There is no way we can ask society to tolerate that. How do we address that?
That is true.
These are important
I would also
questions.
say, though, that it is just as intolerable for somebody to walk into a classroom at Virginia Tech with 2 handguns.
Yes.
And start murdering people.
Yes.
Right? Or to take a 20-ton truck and to mow down hundreds of people in France.
Exactly. Look, the tool is not the story. The tool is part of the story. You and I would agree that the guy who shot up that church in Texas, who had a conviction for domestic violence, should not have had the weapon he had. We agree with that. There was a felon out in California who had a modern rifle and shot and killed a CHP officer the other day. Mm-hmm. This guy should not have had a weapon. How did he have a weapon? Did he buy it, quote unquote, legally? Did he steal it? Did he buy it from someone? Are we enforcing those gun laws that would bust those people? Look, I've seen chilling statistics from Chicago about straw purchasers. We put these laws into effect, and then we don't prosecute the people who buy for felons. That's crazy. Are we trying to make a point, or are we trying to stop violence by bad people? But it's not a solution. Look, the solution is not infringing on normal people's rights. It is not disarming citizens. It is not banning certain classes of weapons that stupid people think are scary. It is a comprehensive approach that involves a lot of different elements that have so much more to do. Look, why these freaks of nature walk in and start hurting people for no good reason, a concept completely alien to people like you and me and all our listeners here, because we're the people who protect people. We're the people who are willing to put our lives on the line to keep people from getting hurt. We take no pleasure in hurting people. We don't back down from a fight, but this is not a fight. This is murder. And these are people who have to be dealt with in some way. And we have to be aggressively part of the process to deal with them in a way that doesn't infringe on our constitutional rights, because that's just not going to happen. And I don't think Trump's going to betray us on this. I think he gets it. And I think he understands that there are ways we can do things better and that we should be open to them. I think the role of us in the gun rights movement is to be extremely suspicious while also appearing fair and open-minded and considering, when we see something, considering it on its merits, not just, red flag laws are all bad. Well, are they? Tell me what you mean by a red flag law. 17 states have them. Are all 17 states unacceptable to us? I don't know if they are. I haven't read them all. Well, I'd like to know what there is. Maybe they will be to me. Maybe they won't be. I haven't seen them all. But, is there, how do you protect people's constitutional rights? How do you adjudicate things? How do you keep, because, there are liberals out there saying, well, if I see someone with a gun in public, I'm calling the cops. Well, don't walk around Oklahoma. You're going to have a sad day.
That's right. All right, let me ask you one more question here before we run out of time. So Beto is resetting his presidential campaign. He is all on board with virtually every gun control law that you could possibly think of. He wants to nuke the filibuster so that we could pass all of these gun control laws without needing 60 votes in the Senate. I've got a piece of Bearing Arms that just says, and I'm kind of writing this tongue-in-cheek, but I'm also half serious here, Beto should just come out in favor of full repeal of the Second Amendment. Why not? Well, I mean, if he's out there calling for gun licensing and waiting periods and all this stuff, he's no different than virtually any other candidate out there. Why not be bold and just say, listen, I think this right is too dangerous for Americans to exercise these days. Let's have a 28th Amendment to repeal the Second.
That is what he thinks. And that is what the liberals think. They want us disarmed so that we can be serfs. And part of the fun of it is rubbing our faces in our own powerlessness. The furry. He's going nowhere. He's a lost cause, and I think we're going to see a lot more of these people doubling down, because we like our entertainment has become niche, politics has become niche. That would really play well in well-protected places in Los Angeles and Manhattan and San Francisco and nowhere else. And it would also raise very troubling problems that are horrifying to even consider. Beto's a Texas guy. I remember a time that the federal government decided that certain people shouldn't have certain guns and decided to go take them, and a bunch of federal agents and about 80 kids got killed. I don't know if Americans are ready to pay that price to stuff it to the rubes. Beto is a fool and a clown, but he is a fool and a clown that some of these folks listen to. And it's, I wouldn't say it's troubling, because I wouldn't say his choices are troubling. I think the Democratic Party's coming down full scale against private ownership of weapons is hugely problematic and stupid. These are not people who think 2 or 3 steps down the road.
Kurt Schlichter, as always, man, it is good talking with you. Glad we can have you here on Bearing Arms' Cam and Company.
Glad you could have me.
All right, now let's get to our armed citizen story. We've got our good deal of the day, but we also have another story, unfortunately, just like the story out of Philadelphia. Guy, 6-time, convicted felon, all kinds of chances and opportunities to put this guy behind bars for a long period of time, and it simply wasn't done. Failure to enforce the existing laws on the books. That is a huge issue. Well, we got another example of this. Fort Worth, Texas. Fort Worth father now faces gun and child neglect charges after an accidental shooting. Yeah, as it turns out, this guy couldn't legally own this firearm to begin with. The arrest affidavit, they say, for 27-year-old Moses Ray Ogwin says 2 children and another child got a hold of his loaded gun in June, and the children were shot as a result. Police say Ogwin's now charged with multiple counts because he's a convicted felon and isn't even allowed to possess a firearm. He was booked into the Tarrant County Jail on 7 charges last week, including recklessly endangering a child. The arrest affidavit says that Ogwin's daughter and son were shot by their cousin after finding a gun in their father's belongings back in June. Court documents say Ogwin left a loaded handgun accessible to his children and their cousin. According to the arrest affidavit, his 7-year-old daughter was in the laundry room with her 6-year-old brother, their 10-year-old cousin, looking for one of her markers in a blue plastic box that belonged to her father, and she said, "I found my dad's gun." 10-year-old told police that the 7-year-old, quote, held the gun in the air, and the boy took the gun from her. When the 10-year-old tried to take the gun away from the 7-year-old to give it to their grandmother, the affidavit states that the 10-year-old's hand, quote, slipped onto the trigger, firing the gun at the 6- and 7-year-olds. Fort Worth police officer Jimmy Polizani says the kids that they are, very inquisitive, wanted to see what it was. Next thing you know, the trigger was pulled and they were rushed to the hospital. According to the affidavit, the children's grandmother was in the kitchen when she heard the gunshot. 7-year-old was struck in the arm. 6-year-old was struck in the chest, requiring open heart surgery to remove several pellets or fragments from the bullet that penetrated his heart. When police asked Ogwin whether or not there were any firearms in the home, he said, "Not to my knowledge." He says he had brought home a blue box from storage, but had not gone through the box other than, he said, to retrieve work clothes. Court records show that Ogwin was convicted on a felony charge of theft of property back in 2012, sentenced to jail time in 2014 for violating his probation. Now facing 3 counts of recklessly endangering a child, 3 counts of making a firearm accessible to a child, as well as 1 count of unlawful possession of a firearm. In armed citizen news from Virginia, got a story out of Newport News, not far from the Virginia Beach area, where a burglary suspect was shot during an attempted home invasion. As Channel 13 reports, the tables quickly turned on a suspect who was shot inside the home that he was trying to burgle. Yep. Dispatchers got a call about 10 p.m. Wednesday night to a call on the 500 block of Purlew Drive. Officers went to check the scene. They found an adult male with multiple gunshot wounds that were considered life-threatening. Investigators learned the guy was trying to burgle this home, was shot by somebody inside the home. Police also do say the burglary suspect and the victim know each other. I don't know how exactly. Medics took the suspect to a nearby hospital for treatment. Investigation is ongoing. According to authorities, they're not looking for any more suspects at the time. If we hear any more information, We'll bring that to you in a future Cam and Company. Our good deed of the day also from the state of Virginia, Danville, Virginia, down in the southern part of the state, where a Virginia police officer, Melissa Carey, being praised for her work in saving a 2-year-old child. So this was on Tuesday of this week at a place called Nikki's Restaurant, Nikki's Family Restaurant. And Officer Carey was eating lunch there, and a waitress pointed out a child that appeared to be in some distress. So Carey runs over to the family, starts administering first aid, got the child breathing again. Baby boy taken to a local hospital to be checked out. Carey stopped by the hospital later in the day to see how the family was doing. The mom told the police department, if it was not for Officer Carey, my baby would not be here. And when Officer Carey went to check on that family again, that's where she was able to snap that picture of her and this baby boy who is on the road to recovery. How about that? Well, that is unfortunately about all the time that we've got for you on this edition of Bearing Arms' Cam and Company. The good news is we'll be back tomorrow, the Friday edition. Dave Copel, Research Director of the Independence Institute, is slated to join us on the program. We'll also have all of today's top Second Amendment news and information. And remember, if you like this in a podcast form, you don't want to stare at this ugly mug, while we're on the air, we've got great news for you. You can find us on iTunes now. Yes, how about that? Also, townhall.com, their podcast section, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere your finer podcasts are available. You can download the audio version. Thanks again for watching, for listening, for spreading the word. And we will see you here soon with another edition of Bearing Arms' Cam and Company.